I'm just so excited and inspired and looking forward to our next speaker. Deacon Kevin Barkocy was born and raised in Albuquerque, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Never mind his NL. I didn't have time to write jokes. Sorry. Yeah, too much texting. He's been married to 31 years to his beautiful wife, Mary Beth, who is also his high school sweetheart. And this is where we say, aww. And Mary Beth, by the way, she really is beautiful. She's got this like golden hair, like curly hair. And I was at Home Depot the other day. My wife wanted like straw to put on our strawberries, and I'm out in the garden section. And there's this woman like with the same kind of hair as Mary Beth and a face mask on. And I'm like, oh, the Barkocy's moving to town. I wonder if that's Mary Beth. Because, you know, you go to a home improvement store when you move into a town. You, like, have to, you know, fix up your stuff. And she was, like, looking at something. I was like, Mary Beth, is that you? And she looked up with her face mask. And I still couldn't recognize because she's got a face mask on. All I see is the hair going everywhere, you know. And she's like, huh? And I'm like, oh, hey, this isn't awkward. Like, you have a good day, ma'am. Like, I was just here picking up hay or straw or I don't know what and I just got out of there. But anyhow, Mary Beth and Kevin are an amazing couple, doing dynamic work in Albuquerque. I got to see them in action there, and I'm so glad they're here at Holy Apostles. Mary Beth is working at Children's Hospital as a pediatric physical therapist. He has two fantastic young adult children. Brianna, 24, just completed her master's in occupational therapy from Washington University in St. Louis, and Nathan, 22, is finishing his senior year at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio. Deacon Kevin has over 30 years of experience in youth education and adult ministry in Colorado and in New Mexico. He was ordained to the permanent diaconate in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe in June 2014. So does that make you a baby deacon, or are you more like an adolescent, like a teenage deacon? Okay, I like that. Before moving from Albuquerque to Colorado Springs in March, he worked at St. Pius X High School teaching classes in chemistry, physics, and theology while serving as the chairman of the theology department. And Deacon Kevin's going to speak to us. The title of this talk is That Real Men Believe in Miracles. Would you give a warm welcome to Deacon Kevin Barkocy?
So thank you very much, and thanks, Tom, for that intro to this idea of miracles. So my story, the story I'm going to share with you tonight, is it's a very powerful story. It's a story of God working in the life, in my life, in the life of my son, my daughter, my family, in the most amazing ways. And it's been a 5-year journey, and we're going to kind of condense that into a short talk, but there's still some very, very powerful moments that I hope you take away with this idea that God is still very present. God does miracles. God can and will be part of your life. So I begin with this quote from Jeremiah. It's all very familiar to you, for I know the plans I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for woe. When you call on me and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you look for me, yes, you can find me with your whole heart. This is sort of become our family verse. This is one of the verses that was Nathan's favorite before the story I'm about to tell you, and it really kind of was etched in our family lexicon from there. So getting to it, so I mentioned I have a wonderful daughter and an amazing son, and my son was a gifted athlete and truly a remarkable cyclist. So when he was a sophomore in high school, this is him at 15 years old. I don't know if you know anything about cycling. He's there at the Tour of the Gila, which is a big multi-stage race down in Silver City. Youngest person ever to win his level in the history of the Tour of the Gila. I still remember when he crossed the finish line, the announcer said, "And now the future of cycling in New Mexico, Nathan Barkocy." And his coach was thinking, big time. He really was just a freak of nature on the bike. That's him on the winning stance. I mean, he's beating men, right? He's at 15. He's racing against 22-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 30 men, and he won. So later that summer, we took him out to California to compete in nationals. He finished top 10 in nationals. He was being looked at by amateur cycling teams, European teams. He had his vision planned. He was, going to go to Europe. He was going to do Tour de France. He was just that good. And then in January of the following year, January of 2016, I got a text from my wife that was the worst possible text a father could ever get. And it said, Nathan's been hit, get to the hospital. And in that moment, gentlemen, in that moment, I learned two very important lessons. The first lesson was last words matter. And you hear it all the time, but until it becomes real, it doesn't become part of your conscience. Right? As I'm driving to the hospital, I'm thinking, what was the last thing I said to my son? Because I'm not sure if I'm ever going to see him again. So last words matter, gentlemen. Always leave in love. I don't care how mad you are at your kids, your wife, your buddies, your whatever, your boss, your coworkers. Leave in love. Because you never know if those will be the last words that you will ever say or that they will ever hear. So always leave in love. And that's the other thing that I realized in that flash of a second, was that the next second isn't guaranteed for any of us. Right? We don't know that all of us are going to arrive home as we're driving home tonight. We don't know we're all going to wake up in the morning. We have so many life minutes. And those are there just are. And so it's an important realization. What are you doing with your life minutes? What are you doing to get close to God? So he was traveling with his team, and he was struck by a driver going 50 miles an hour. And that's all that was left of the bike. And he was hit, smashed into the windshield, thrown about 30 feet, and just in a clump. His coach was also taken out. There was a third rider on the team that was still very much aware. He called 911. When the ambulance drivers arrived, they said it was a fatality. They looked at him, and they called it in, and they said, we're bringing a young man into the emergency room, and we're pretty sure he's dead. So they get to the hospital, and the coach's wife had been called. My wife called me, sent me the text. I'm on the phone. She said, he's been hit. It's really bad. Get to the hospital. So the coach's wife arrives at the hospital first, and she's been on the phone with her husband. And so she comes into the reception area, and she says there were a couple of cyclists were just brought in. And the nurse at the reception area said, yeah, one of them was a fatality. And she knew that she'd just been talking to her husband 5 minutes earlier, so she knew it was Nathan. So by the time we'd gotten to the hospital, they found a pulse. They had him in the ICU. He had a traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma. And the doctors came out and said, we need to put they called it a bolt. We need to put this thing in his head. And it serves two functions. One, you keep an eye on brain activity, and the other one will drain off the spinal fluid so his brain doesn't swell and pinch the back of the spinal cord. And so we said, yes, do it, whatever, do it. And the doctors didn't think he was going to make it. And the nurses, we later found out, would go home every night and say to their spouses or their families that young boy, he's probably not going to be there in the morning. So when we were finally allowed to see him, this is what I saw. And this was my son, who, that morning was the young man on his way to a successful career in cycling. And he was in a coma. And gentlemen, there's nothing more terrifying than being in the room, and they do these neurological tests. So every day for 12 days, they would grab his trap and they'd squeeze as hard as they could, and they're screaming his name and they're yelling, Nathan, can you hear me? Nathan, if you can hear me, wiggle your finger, wiggle your toe. Nothing. They take their knuckle and they grind it on the sternum and they scream. If you can feel it, if you're in there, wiggle your finger, wiggle your toes. Nothing. So they said, if he comes out of this, he will most likely be paralyzed. He will most likely be trapped in the brain of like an 8-year-old. He will most likely never complete high school. He will most likely be semi-vegetative. And in those moments, if you don't have faith, you don't have anything. In those moments, the church woke up. And I remember there was a priest at Pius, and he said, Kevin, he was this great priest from Nigeria. He said, the doctors have spoken, the nurses have spoken, but God has not spoken yet. And I said, all right, Father, I believe. And so after 12 days, I still remember, after 12 days in a coma, I remember the day when they were rubbing on his chest, and they said, Nathan, can you wiggle your fingers? Can you give me a thumbs up? And his right hand went like this. And I was like, yes. And I never thought that I'd be so excited to see my kid's thumb move, right? I mean, you're excited when your kid comes home from curfew on time, and you're excited when they get an A in school, and you're excited when they pick up their room. I've never been so excited to see his thumb move. So I went running out to the waiting room, which was packed with people, and I said, his thumb just moved. And they cheered. Because God had not spoken yet. Because we believed, and let me tell you, the church woke up through this event. So this is kind of a shout out, but that guy over there is Archbishop Wester. He's the bishop of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And he was just a newly that's the wrong word. Installed, thank you very much. He was just newly installed, and he was making his rounds to all the little Catholic schools and all the parishes, and every single parish he went into, every single Mass, they were praying for this kid, Nathan. And he said, I got to come down and I got to see this kid. Like the entire Catholic community is alive in prayer for this kid. And then this is Monsignor Voorhees, he's a pastor there. He came down. Same story. I heard about it. I had to come down. He was blessed by a Monsignor, by a bishop. He was blessed by priests. This dude, the Lord was looking over my son. And then we started to see the other side effects. We were getting messages from people who were saying, I haven't prayed in 15 years, but I'm praying for your son. Because it was up on Facebook, it was up on social media, it was up on people were residing. We got it from China. There was missionaries in China that said, we found out about your son. We're praying. There was a youth group in Minnesota, and they sent a little video. And they're at their youth group, and they were praying for Nathan, and they said, we're hoping for you and your family. So after about 2.5, 3 weeks, he opened his eyes, which was beautiful, but it was painful, right? Like, that's a hard picture for me, because that's all he could do. He could wiggle his thumb. He could open his eyes. Still couldn't talk. They were still saying he's going to be paralyzed on his left side. He was getting a little right side movement, but his left was dead. They said he's going to be left side paralyzed if he even comes out of this. So he kept getting better, right? The prayers worked. The miracle was happening. So he gets out of the ICU. At that point, he can barely even, he couldn't even sit up. He could just roll to his right side. So we came up to Craig Hospital. I know the Craig Hospital up there in Denver. Again, another miracle. He was really too young. They usually start with 17-year-olds at the time. He was only 15. Another whole blessing that he even got into Craig. So at Craig Hospital, he had to learn everything again. He had to learn how to walk. He had to learn how to eat, how to swallow, how to speak, how to move. He had to learn everything. Then with the traumatic brain injury, it was like Groundhog Day. Everything was new. And so breakfast was his favorite thing, because it was bacon, fresh, every day. And we'd bring in we go and bring in breakfast, and he'd eat bacon, and he's like, I've never had this before. What is this stuff? This is so good. And M&Ms right after lunch. He'd have an M&M, and he'd go, oh, this is so good. I've never had this before. It's amazing. And it was, it was heartwarming, but it's so sad. Like he was an honor student. He was a smart kid, and they had him in a giant playpen. It was like he was, a year old again. And every morning he'd peep his little head out of the playpen. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. And it was beautiful, but it was so hard. It was so hard. But he kept trying. He kept believing. And I remember so succinctly, he got to the point where he could write. And I was preaching at the high school. And I said, hey, I'm doing Mass on Monday morning. What should I tell the students? Because the pious community, the high school community, orange was his favorite color because of the Broncos. And every tree had an orange ribbon. And the kids had on ribbons on their backpacks. And they were wearing orange on their shoes. And they had orange bandanas. And the whole campus, daily prayer for Nathan. Total support. And I said, what do you want to tell? And he wrote in this kind of scraggled script, not give up till I'm better. And I said, all right, that's what I'll tell him. And I was driving home, and I'm like, Lord, give me that strength, right? I'm not going to give up until he's better. So he continues to make progress. I watch him take his first steps again, right? I watch him eat again, just like I did when he was 2. He learns how to speak again. And he keeps getting better, and God keeps working. And his left side woke up, and his right side got better, and his brain got better. And God started doing amazing things. And he started doing therapy, and he loved these little therapy dogs. And he started taking his first steps, and he walked again, and he talked again. And one day we put a guitar in his hand, and he used to play, and he started strumming the guitar, and he remembered those chords. And this boy that the doctor said would never walk again, this boy that was not supposed to ever have a life, this boy that was not supposed to graduate from high school, this boy that was dead, pronounced dead at the scene, that's him and his sister on discharge day, graduated from high school on time back in 2018, went off to college, Franciscan University, something they thought that would never ever happen. Last summer, he did a 100-mile bike ride. He did a century on his bike. I did 60 miles with him. He went from coma to century in 2 years. Because God is bigger than our problems. Because miracles are real. And that beautiful young girl right there just became his fiance last weekend. Yeah. See, gentlemen, real men believe in miracles because miracles still happen. Real men believe in prayer because prayer is real and prayer is efficacious. Real men believe in God because God believes in us. Those are powerful lessons. So the next part of the story is this, right? What about the driver? Right? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Gentlemen, I am not proud of how I thought about that driver. I'm a deacon, but I was ordained at the time. And I had some rage, gentlemen. I had fat. I didn't want to kill him. Like, I'm not going there. I just wanted to whoop him upside the head and give him a brain injury. Just let him know what it felt like. So the first time I ever had contact with the driver, and it was just a case of distracted driving. Right? The guy wasn't even on his phone. They did the whole investigation. The guy was just, it still blows my mind to this day how he could have missed 3 cyclists. So his sentence was light. Right? So the day of the sentencing comes up. And I've got my whole speech planned. And I'm going for it. I'm going to ask this judge to throw the book at him. So my wife went first, and she showed terrible, awful pictures. And she talked about what it was like to be a mom of a young boy. She's a physical therapist, and she talked about all the brain injury and the cognitive issues and the physical issues. And she laid out this beautiful story of just how he was wrecked. And he was up next. And they all coming up to her were like, Nathan, what are you going to say? Nathan, what are you going to say? And he goes, I'm not sure. I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit guide me. And I said, son, that's beautiful, but you got to have a plan. Like, I believe Amen, brother. I believe in the Holy Spirit, but, you give him a plan. So he's talking to the judge, female judge, and she says, Nathan, what have you got to say? And he said, Your Honor, I have forgiven this man. He changed my life. I'll never be the same. I'll never live my dream of being a professional cyclist. But I forgive this man. And I don't think he should go to jail. I think he should have to go to driving schools and to other places and give talks about distracted driving and how dangerous it is. And I'd be willing to do it with him. And she's making notes, and she goes, okay. And I'm stunned. Because here's my son, right? And I'm so proud as a dad, like a Catholic deacon, my son is forgiving. Like that's my boy. To be forgiving, that's how I raised you. But I did a bad job on myself because I'm about to just throw him in prison and let him rot. And so, I said, Your Honor, I forgive him too. Kind of. I have to tell you, it was a kind of. I had my fingers crossed behind my back. I'm not Father, sorry. I'll get to the confession side of this in just a little bit. But I kind of gave my story, and she said, I have been on the bench for 12 years, and I've seen the worst of the worst, and I have never experienced anything like this. She said, Nathan, you are an extraordinary young man, and I'm going to do what you asked, and I'm not going to send him to jail. I'm going to give him community service. And I was stunned, but I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I remember talking about it with a good priest friend of mine, and I said, I got to let go of this rage. I got to let go of this anger, right? You pray for those who persecute you. And the priest said, when you hold on to hatred, when you hold on to anger, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's killing you. It's not affecting him at all. You need to forgive him for real. And I finally did. And it was a beautiful thing. And this man that almost put my son in the grave started doing talks at driving schools. And my son did more evangelization in a coma and in a talk at driving schools than I ever did from the pulpit. Because they would give a talk together, and Nathan would tell his story and show those pictures and say that, his life had forever changed. And then this guy would get up, and he was an insurance adjuster, and he would show pictures of cars that, this is a car from a lady that fell asleep at the wheel. This is a car from somebody who driving the wrong side on the interstate, blah, blah, blah. And then he showed this car, and it had the front end bashed in, and you could see the indentation in the window, the windshield, where a body had hit. And he said, this is a car that would be typical of hitting a pedestrian or a cyclist. This is the car that hit Nathan. This is the car that I was driving when I hit him. And that stunned feeling that you all just felt every time we gave the talk. And it was amazing the people afterwards didn't care about distracted driving. They come up to my wife and I and they said, how can you be in the same room with this man that almost killed your son, that changed his life forever? And I said, I can't. But there's this dude Jesus in my life, and he allows me that ability. I did more evangelization in love than I ever could from a pulpit. And so I met with this guy, and he had his life changed. After that experience, when he looked down at a dead body or what he thought was dead, this guy hadn't been to church in 25 years. First place he drove was home, called his daughter. He said, Dad, you got to get to church. We got to pray for this kid. He totally turned his life around. And because he wasn't sent to jail, he now does prison ministry. He goes into prisons and he has Bible study and he brings people to the Lord, and he always sends us little pictures of calls them his guys. Here's me with my guys. One of them got out and he's got a job and he still loves Jesus. That's him at Nathan's graduation. So gentlemen, if you're holding on to some hatred, if you're holding on to some anger, you got to let it go. You got to let it go. It'll eat you up. And there's power in forgiveness, and there's power in love, and there's power in moving on, right? Stuff's happened. It's time to move on. And we still, every now and again, he always sends us a message on the day in January when he hit him. Just said, hey, I'm thinking about you guys. I'm praying for you guys. It's pretty amazing. So remember, the Lord forgave you, so you forgive others, right? It's a good book right there. It's good advice. And so this is the other part of the story, the last little section. I call it when heaven touches earth. Because there were amazing spiritual things that were going on that blew us away. And this young lady right here, her name is Rory. She's a little sweetheart. She was one of my students. And at a very young age, she had what I call mystic encounters. Starting at the age of 8, every Good Friday, she would have a sort of a vision of herself at the foot of the cross on Good Friday. And really partake in the suffering of Jesus. And it freaked her out, obviously, as an 8-year-old. And she ended up, they contacted the spiritual people and the priests and everybody, and they said, it's legit. And so she was my student at Pius, and then she became close with our family, and then she went to Catholic University up in Washington. And she found out about Nathan, and the first place she went was to the big cathedral up there, the Basilica. And so it's day 2, right? We're still not knowing. Every day was like the next 24 hours, or big next 24 hours. Next 24 hours. So this is day 2. He's still in a coma. The nurses and doctors are still thinking that he's going to die. We don't know what's going on. She calls me up and she says, Mr. B, I was just in prayer and I had one of my visions. And I saw Nathan. In Mary's lap, and she's holding him. And Jesus is right by his side. And he's going to be okay. And I thought, oh my gosh. I was weeping. I was like, oh, thanks, Rory. That's amazing. So God gives you these little lifelines, right? These little things to hang on to. And then a few days later that week, he was still in a coma. And he calls, and I see my daughter answer the phone, and I kind of gave her the what's up, and she's like, it's Rory. And I go, okay. And then my daughter's crying, and she hands the phone to my mom. And my mom's on the phone, and my mom starts crying. And she just, like, you have to take this. And so I go, hey, Rory, what's up? She said, well, I was praying. I was at the Basilica, and I had one of these visions, and she described the ICU room exactly. And she said, does the name John and Connie mean anything to you? I said, John and Connie are my deceased mom's parents. Those are my grandparents who have been dead for years and years. And she said, because I had this vision, and in this vision there was a young man in a military uniform and a young woman, and they were standing right next to Nathan's bed, looking over him. And I thought, that's amazing, because they didn't really like each other that much when they were alive. So I was very happy. I was very happy that they're together in eternity. It was rocky when they were here on earth. But she described him, and then she said, and they said to tell Robert and Carol hello. Robert and Carol are their other two, my mom's brother and sister. And so every night from then, and Father, we were talking about the Lord's water. Man, you talk about Catholic sacramentals. That room, I had Jesus on the IV bag. I was bathing him in Lord's water. We had rosaries wrapped around all 4 limbs. We had, you name it, man. We had stuff, holy oils. He was blessed. We were bringing the Catholic. And so every night I'd pray over him, and I'd wash him in Lord's water, and I was just like, Lord, just give me my son. And then I'd look around the room and I go, Grandma, Grandpa, and whoever else is in here, take care of him tonight, because I need some sleep. And I think it was another powerful realization that heaven does touch earth. Like we're not alone in this. Like this spiritual journey that we're on, we're not alone. It's powerful with Jesus. It's powerful with the saints. It's powerful because God is very real in our lives. So story, I think, for me, is something that I've become more adept to sharing. And it's a little bit hesitant because there are people who say, well, I had a different result. My child, my wife, my mother, my father, right? Why didn't God listen to me? And that's a legit question. And I don't know how to answer the whys. But what I do know is that God works in our lives for whatever reason. God works in our lives. Miracles still happen. And so just keep believing that. And I just want to end with this. Real men believe in miracles because the greatest miracle of all time, right, Jesus Christ, was a real man. So if you're at a place ever where you doubt that or you need some reassurance, I just think of my son who was never supposed to walk again, who's going to walk down the aisle with that beautiful young woman and live his life because Jesus Christ was a real man. Amen.